LSU takes a major L, Oklahoma forgets that there's a second half to their football game, and Miami could be the toughest ACC opponent for Clemson in years. I'm Jay Smith, and this is After Further Review.
And now, after further review, a Clemson student's perspective on sports.
And a personal foul on number 99 of the defense. After he tackled the quarterback, he's giving them business down there. That's a 15-yard penalty.
Well, welcome in, everyone. I'm Jay Smith, and you are listening to After Further Review. Appreciate you tuning in, whether it's through the podcast on iTunes, Spotify, or Anchor, or watching on Facebook. Appreciate you tuning in, as always. Lots to get to, lots to break down from the Week 4 action. Look, we talked about this on the Friday show. SEC is back, thank goodness, and a lot of SEC games were played this past weekend. We'll dive into a few of them in a second, but want to lead off with the big story out of Week 4, and that was the upset of the defending national champions, LSU, in their season opener against Mississippi State, and a Mississippi State team that is being helmed by Mike Leach, his opening game in the SEC. And really, watching this game, that 10-point difference is a lot closer than it felt, if I'm being honest with you. This is a game that, at times it was close, and at times it really felt like Mississippi State was pulling away really, really strongly. 44-34 final score, but I don't really think that tells the story of this game. I mean, listen, LSU last season had three quarters of football all year scoreless, and they went scoreless in the first quarter. So it was already an inauspicious start for the Tigers. They weren't really getting anything going. Miles Brennan was having some major issues, and they were just stagnant. I mean, LSU looked like they were shell-shocked, honestly. We all know, they lost a lot of talent. I mean, 14 guys went in the NFL draft. They lost their offensive coordinator. They lost their defensive coordinator. But Mississippi State was just the better team. They were the better team. They were out. LSU was outplayed, outcoached, outprepared. I'm not sure if that's an actual term, but Mississippi State was ready for this matchup, and LSU was not. Bottom line, you have to give credit to KJ Costello for Mississippi State, a guy that threw for an SEC record 623 yards and 5 touchdowns. He was 36 for 60, 623 yards and 5 TDs. And again, breaking down this game, it was 17-14 at the half. So it was LSU did kind of claw their way back into it. They scored their first touchdown with 9:45 left in the second quarter, and that was a pick six. Jabril Cox took that. It was a 14-yard interception return. So pick six to start off and kind of get that momentum back. And then they strung together a nice 8-play, 84-yard drive in a couple of minutes with 5:20 left in the second quarter. So that was the first real sign of life for LSU the entire game. I mean, it was basically more than halfway through the second quarter before we really got to see any sort of life from LSU. And meanwhile, Mississippi State had already put together two nice scoring drives. They had a 12-play, 66-yard drive. It was about 6.5 minutes, actually, that ended in a field goal. So LSU did hold them to a field goal. But and that was in the first quarter. But then they had a 6-play, 75-yard drive in 2 minutes with 7:45 on the clock in the second. So we'd already seen Mississippi State demonstrate an ability to move the ball against LSU's defense. And that just kind of continued throughout the rest of the game. What was really impressive to me about Mississippi State was they never lost their composure, and they never let the moment become too big for them. And obviously you're playing the number 6 team, the defending national champions, 15-game, winning. Actually, it may have been more than 15 games. I don't know how many games LSU finished the previous season winning, but either way, right, this is a team that's the defending national champs, and you're on the road. Yes, it's a limited capacity crowd, but it's still, you're still in Death Valley. Not Death, but Death Valley. So either way, right? Either way, this is a big game. This is a big game, and it's your coach's first game in the SEC in Mike Leach. But they never lost their composure. They maintained the same momentum throughout the entire game, and they really played very well. They played much better than LSU did, and it's amazing that this game got within 10 points. And to be honest with you, right there at the beginning of the fourth quarter, when Mississippi State went up 34-24, it felt like it was starting to slip away. The momentum was swinging, and then I believe Mississippi State had the ball. They were driving, and then there was a turnover, which resulted in a quick LSU touchdown drive of 3 plays and 45 yards, and that pulled it within 3. LSU would go on to tie it with a field goal. So with 9:37 left, this was a tied game. This was a 34-34 game, and it really was wide open. I mean, Mississippi State had proven throughout the contest that they were more prepared, but this was essentially a 9.5 minute, hey, whoever scores the most is going to win. And Mississippi State scored 10 straight points, a field goal and a touchdown, and LSU couldn't do anything. So a final score of 44-34. And what's really incredible is that with 4 turnovers, LSU could only put up 34 points. Mississippi State turned the ball over 4 times, still gained over 600 total yards, 632 total yards. LSU only was able to only rack up 425 total yards. They did have a couple turnovers, so there was only a -2 turnover ratio for Mississippi State, but still 4 turnovers you would expect would cost you at least 2 touchdowns, maybe 17 points, maybe 20 points. But it just wasn't the case. And look, it's not like time of possession was a factor. These teams possessed the ball about equal. It was 30 minutes, 28 seconds for Mississippi State and 29-32 for LSU. And LSU moved the ball, right? They had more first downs than Mississippi State. They had 25 first downs, Mississippi State 24. It was just they weren't able to capitalize. And again, with 4 turnovers for Mississippi State, it wasn't like it was a clean game. It wasn't. I mean, Costello, he had all those stats, and he set an SEC record for passing yards, but he still threw 2 picks. So, in terms of, and we've gone through the box score, we've gone through everything here, but in terms of the takeaway is that LSU they're searching for an identity. They're searching for some sort of answer to the question of what are you going to do now that everybody's gone. And Miles Brennan, he performed okay, not great in the first half. I mean, he did finish with over 340 yards passing. He had 3 touchdowns and 2 picks. But the fact of the matter is that this LSU team right now is not in any condition to compete in the SEC. Not even close. This is an LSU team that's on par with Texas A&M, which we will get to later in the show. You want to talk about a team that is searching for an identity? That is Texas A&M, at least in the SEC. Yeah, no, I don't know anybody after watching this game. I mean, there's a few people that still think we should wait and see how things pan out. I disagree. I mean, this was proof enough for me that LSU is not. They're not in. They have. There's way. There are more questions for LSU than there are for Florida. There are more questions for LSU than there are for Auburn. I would even say that Georgia has fewer questions than LSU. And my goodness, Georgia looked bad against Arkansas in that first half. And they did play well in the second half, but you really got to almost credit Arkansas's collapse. You want to talk about a game that was close. Okay, the Arkansas-Georgia game was close. It was 5-7 at halftime. And it really should have been 2-7. I mean, Georgia looked awful. But, was able to come back in the second half, and the score ended, I think it was 37-10 maybe, 27-point victory for Georgia. I off the top of my head, that sounds right. But either way, again, going back to this Mississippi State LSU game, first off, you have to credit Mike Leach. You have to absolutely credit Mike Leach. and you have to, credit his bringing of the air raid offense from the Pac-12 now to the SEC. Put it in the hands of a transfer quarterback, and produced results like we have almost never seen in the SEC. Yes, this was a very depleted LSU team, but this is an LSU team that right now I'd say is running middle of the pack in the SEC. And if Mississippi State can do this to a middle-tier SEC team, they're going to make some noise. They're not just going to make noise in their division, they're going to make noise in the conference. And this is a Mississippi State team that doesn't have, Mike Leach recruiting classes, doesn't have guys optimized for that air raid style. This is a Mississippi State team that's going to be really good. I mean, they're going to be good. I don't know there's many secondaries in the SEC right now that are going to be able to lock down Costello's ability to throw the ball. And it's not like Costello's throwing it to these standout wide receivers. Mississippi State's not wide receiver U. And Costello, look, he was Stanford's starter in 2017, 2018, and then was sidelined with some injuries. But nobody really anticipated this guy coming out and breaking an SEC record in his first game. Just really, really impressive performance from Mike Leach, from Costello. Yes, he needs to clean up the turnovers. 2 picks is okay. 4 turnovers is obviously not something you want to continue, but if you're Mississippi State, you're walking away from this game feeling really good about your chances in the division, really good about your chances in the conference. You have an Arkansas game coming up. I would feel confident about that. Even Kentucky on the road, Texas A&M. Now, those are going to be tests. But Alabama on October 31st could pose a challenge. But as we will talk about later, Alabama didn't exactly look so impressive against Missouri. There was a lot of talk about, Alabama's the favorite in the West, and they're going to die. I'm not sure. I'm not buying that. Again, LSU. This is proof of just how difficult it is to maintain consistency year in, year out. Look, they can look and see what Clemson's doing, and they can try and imitate it. But the fact of the matter is that it just fell apart in front of them. They said I was watching the game, and I want to say it was Brad Nessler on the call for CBS, and he was before the game kicked off talking about how the capacity crowd was limited, I think, to 21,000, and he even said there's no way there's 21,000 people in the stand. I don't think people showed up because I think they thought they were going to just wreck Mississippi State. There were more people in Oxford for the Ole Miss Florida game, and we all knew that Florida was going to take it to Ole Miss. And we'll talk about it a little bit later, but I was really impressed with how well Ole Miss performed in that game and hung around, really. But there were more people, I felt like, in Vaught-Hemingway than there were in Tiger Stadium. Either way, this is a huge, huge deal, at least in the West, because it basically puts Mississippi State on the map, and it puts that Mike Leach style of offense on the map. And I think right now, if you are Auburn and Alabama, you're taking notice. You're taking notice of Mississippi State. I think A&M has proven that they are incompetent and cannot really string together any sort of competitive. There's just so many issues right now at A&M. My goodness. Arkansas has proven against Georgia they had an opportunity. They blew it. Ole Miss still is. They're getting there. They're and played well against Florida, played better than I was expecting, kept it close, but I think right now Mississippi State is I think they're the third best team in the West. I think you got Auburn at the top, Alabama second, and Mississippi State's third best team in the West. And then it's become even more clear-cut on the East side of the things, right? You have the cellar dwellers of Missouri, South Carolina, and Vanderbilt. They're just going to live at the bottom. Kentucky and Tennessee show glimmers of potential to make noise, at least in their division, and it just kind of fizzles. Kentucky had a chance against Auburn, and then they just didn't play very well. They didn't play very well against Auburn. Now, that game was sloppy in the beginning, but Auburn, again, in those types of matchups, you have to be the team that just gets through it. And, we've seen that with a lot of great teams. We've seen that with Clemson last year, having to just get through that UNC game, right? They didn't play their best. UNC played really well, but you just have to get through that game. And Kentucky and Tennessee, I don't think are quite there yet. Now, I know you're probably thinking, you're like, oh, wait a minute now. Now, Tennessee won. They beat South Carolina on the road. Yeah, they did. I mean, it was 31-27, and the only reason they really, I'm not saying the only reason, but if you watched the end of the game and you saw the punt to South Carolina with like a minute, it was like a minute 27 or a minute 30 left, and South Carolina was in good position, right? They were down 4. They were going to get the ball at like the 35-yard line, and the South Carolina guy who was part of the he wasn't fielding the punt, but he was blocking, and the ball hit his leg, and Tennessee recovered in the end of the game. So, I mean, who knows, right? Who knows? That if that ball gets fielded like it should have been, South Carolina could have marched down the field, scored a touchdown. Tennessee wouldn't be ranked this week. So the point is that Tennessee, yeah, they won, but they didn't really take care of business. There's nothing about that game watching it that made me feel like, oh, okay, yeah, Tennessee can definitely take on Florida Florida, but also like Georgia, Alabama, like Georgia in 2 weeks on the road. Are you kidding me? They're gonna get throttled. A&M, Auburn, no. Florida, no. I mean, Tennessee right now has Missouri, Arkansas, and Vanderbilt as games that they should absolutely win. Toss-up games, I would say, are Kentucky, A&M, and maybe Georgia. Maybe. But Alabama, Auburn, and Florida? No way. No way. There's no way. I mean, they're going to go 5-5 this year. I think. I think they're going to go 5-5. And that's splitting the toss-up games. So, again, you look at the SEC, the big takeaway right now is LSU is not going to be competing for a conference championship this year, and I'm not surprised by that. I've been saying that on this show for weeks. Some people didn't believe me. I don't know what you were looking at, because I'm looking at this LSU team. I'm going, who's picking these guys to come out of the West? I'm not. Did I think that Mississippi State was going to beat them on Saturday? No. I thought LSU, with all of their questions, I thought really that they would get it figured out and that they would have slightly more put in place than a first-year coach in the SEC trying to bring a whole new system with a transfer quarterback. To be completely honest with you, my confidence in Mississippi State was not very high, but I was proven wrong. And hey, look, I picked LSU. I'm not picking them for bigger games this season, and I'm certainly not going to pick them for some toss-up games now. But you got to credit Mississippi State. You really got to credit Mississippi State. Elsewhere around the SEC, we've kind of touched on several games, and that was really the big slate. That was a lot of the marquee matchups this weekend was the SEC. Now we will get into Miami and Florida State a little bit later because we have to talk about it, even though there's really nothing to talk about. But we will talk about it. But in terms of the SEC, overall, I thought it was a great week. I thought it really shed light on who the top teams are, and that's Florida, that's Auburn, and we'll slip Alabama and Georgia in there. I wasn't impressed with Georgia. They had a 22-point third quarter against Arkansas, and that's what made it look good. Alabama started off strong against Missouri. It was 28-3 at the half. But Mac Jones only threw for 249 yards and a couple of touchdowns. I mean, it wasn't that dominant performance that we always get from Alabama, right? It doesn't matter if Alabama's playing McNeese State. Okay, they're going to beat them 58-0. Well, they beat Missouri 38-19. So not exactly a blowout by any standard. Now, Missouri scored 13 in the fourth quarter. Some will say, it's garbage time. Yes, it is, but Alabama's not, in the past, they haven't let teams score in garbage time. They don't. I mean, they're one of the few teams ever that just don't let teams score. Now, Clemson, yeah, sometimes they're guilty of letting teams score in garbage time. Ohio State, yeah, sometimes they're guilty of letting teams score in garbage time. But Alabama's never traditionally been like that. They play the full 60 minutes. They don't play down to their opponents, something that other teams like Clemson have done repeatedly. And I was surprised. I was really surprised by the final score of this game. But I think the bigger takeaway really is that Florida and Auburn are the real deal. Florida looked flawless against Ole Miss. Kyle Trask was 30 for 42 for 416 yards and 6 touchdowns. You really could not have asked for a better performance from him. Yes, at some point during this game it was close, and it felt like, okay, maybe Ole Miss has a chance here to kind of flip the momentum and possibly take the lead. But Florida kept their stiff arm extended the whole game. And they did a great job, and they never got distracted. And I thought they played very well. Now, hey, on the flip side of that, I'm not disappointed with Ole Miss. I'm really not. I think having Matt Corral and John Rice Plumlee for Ole Miss get reps was good for Lane Kiffin. I think it gave him a little bit more to work with in terms of a decision. Jarian Ely is going to, I think, continue to be productive on the ground. He had 79 yards rushing. And then Elijah Moore, 10 receptions, 227 yards receiving. Really impressive performance by Ole Miss. Nothing to hang your head in shame about, honestly, if you're the Rebels. I thought it was a really good start to the Lane Kiffin era, even though we all knew that it was probably going to end with a loss. We've pretty much hit on every SEC game from this week. Oh, yeah, so Texas A&M Vanderbilt. I hadn't really talked about this one. Okay, so Texas A&M Vanderbilt. This was, I believe, one of 2 games in the... Yeah, it was one of 2 games in the SEC this weekend that had safeties, which is weird. I don't know when the last time that... I'd like to know when the last time there's been 2 games in one conference that had safeties. I don't know. Maybe it happens all the time, but I feel like it doesn't. Either way, 17-12 final score here. And A&M, I mean, this game really never should have been this close. For me, it showed that A&M still is undisciplined in a lot of ways. And I specifically point to in the second quarter when it's 7-3. So it's a close game, right? It's a close game. And there's there's a 7:23 left in the second quarter. So we're halfway through the second quarter. And Vandy's punting the ball. A&M fields it in the end zone. Now, why this guy decides to take it out of the end zone, I will never understand. I mean, this man is, and I'm sure most of you have probably seen the video, but he's 8 yards deep in the end zone. Okay, even if the other team was at midfield, you'd have to go, do I really need to take this ball out of the end zone? What am I going to, why? Just take the knee, dude. Just take the knee and go to the 25-yard line. But, instead he decides to run it out, and there's a, he's a couple yards before he gets to the goal line, and his teammate is trying to block a Vandy player who's literally, there's 3 guys in the end zone, okay? There's 3, this returner is running laterally. He's running across to get around the Vanderbilt guy who's literally in the end zone, and his teammate does what his, teammate's going to do. He's going to blindside block him, block in the back, whatever. And immediately I was like, whoa, that's a safety. And they didn't quite call it immediately, I believe, because he got out to the 8-yard line. And, the refs got together, they talked about it, and they were like, yeah, after whatever, the foul occurred in the end zone, and that results in a safety. So I was like, what is going on? And Jimbo, he'd shoot out his player a little bit, but to be honest with you, it just proved that A&M still has so many issues. They had 3 turnovers in this game, lots of mistakes, just mental errors that I'm not accustomed to seeing from a Jimbo Fisher-led team. I don't recall there being this many mental mistakes when he was at Florida State. I mean, Florida State was precise. They were almost meticulous with how they dissected you. Not the case. A&M is just a mess. It is a mess to watch. I mean, it really is. Kellen Mond fumbled twice in this game, so ball protection is going to have to be emphasized during the practices this week. And even though A&M never trailed after the first quarter in this game, they were never able to pull away. See, that's the biggest thing for me is that A&M, right? They're up 7-3 at the end of the first quarter, and the final score is 17-12. And both of these teams don't have great defense. This is just an ugly game. This was an ugly game. And even Jimbo said, this is a direct quote from Jimbo after the game. He said, "A victory is a victory, but all three phases didn't play out how I thought we could or how we can." That pretty much tells you everything you need to know. When a coach says a victory is a victory, you already know, yeah, we won, but we look like crap. We look like crap, and A&M looked like crap. And if A&M even thinks that they can do that against, oh boy, get ready for this, at Alabama next week, Florida at home the week after, at Mississippi State the week after that, A&M's going to be 1-3. And I think they will be. There's no way they're beating Alabama or Florida. And I think Mississippi State at home, I think they can do it. I think they'll beat A&M. I think A&M is going to start 1-3. And they could have started 0-4. Because you really, as much as you want to rag A&M in this case, I think you have to also credit Vandy for sticking around. A team that was, outclassed, but still managed to make it a 5-point game. So, either way, that's the wrap-up from Week 4 of the SEC season. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we will talk about Oklahoma, the Sooners, forgetting that they had to play football in the second half of their game. That's next. Stick with us. Welcome back to the show. You're listening to After Further Review. I'm Jay Smith. Appreciate you tuning in. Again, whether it's through the podcast available on iTunes, Spotify, or Anchor. All you got to do is search After Further Review. You can pull us up wherever you get your podcast, subscribe to listen to your episodes wherever you are, whenever you want to, rather. Or if you're watching on Facebook, again, appreciate you tuning in however it may be. Time to talk about the second topic of today's show, which is Oklahoma and the Sooners. Apparent, just, hey, let's not play the second half of our football game. Really a shocking outcome. I mean, to be completely frank, because this was a game that, obviously we discussed on the Friday show. Kansas State beat them the year before, when Oklahoma was ranked 5. I would. And again, it's almost hard to know unless you're, Elias Sports Bureau. But I would love to know when the last time a team that is unranked beats another team that was in the top 5 2 consecutive years. I don't know if it's ever happened, but I'd love to know, if it's ever happened, when was the last time that happened? When an unranked team beat a top 5 team consecutive years in a row, 2 in a row. Either way, this is a stunning outcome. You really have to credit Kansas State for hanging around and for putting up 31 points in the second half. Skylar Thompson for Kansas State was, not spectacular, but he was good enough. I mean, he was 18 for 25, 334 yards and a touchdown. On the ground, the leading rusher for Kansas State, Vaughn, had 8 carries for 45 yards. So, this is more, I think, a collapse by Oklahoma, and an Oklahoma team that was leading 21-7 at the half, and then just kind of gave up. I I don't know what happened here. I mean, you look through the box score and, you see Oklahoma had 517 yards to Kansas State's 400. Kansas State, this is going to blow your mind. Kansas State had 10 first downs in this game. 10. They had 10. Okay, that's like you're playing NCAA and you just Hail Mary every time you get the ball. And, sometimes you don't get the touchdown. You end up at the 2. So you have to run the ball in. That technically is a first down, from your 20 to the 2. 10 first downs to Oklahoma's 28. But when you start to dissect this game, you understand where it unravels. And that's in the turnover margin. Oklahoma turned the ball over 4 times. And remember all that talk about Rattler, and how he's going to be competing with Trevor Lawrence for the Heisman, and he's arrived, and all the talk. Fact is that the guy threw 3 picks. He threw 3 picks, and it was a really ugly performance, especially in the second half, because Kansas State just continued to pour it on. I mean, they scored the last 24 points in this game. Oklahoma's last scoring possession was with 2:46 left in the third quarter. It was a 5-play, 75-yard drive. And then Kansas State proceeded to go touchdown, 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 field goal. And they even went up. They went up 38-35 with 4.5 minutes to play. And Oklahoma couldn't do anything with the ball. Really, really shocking, because this, after what else has happened in the Big 12 and looking at the conference as a whole, you just have to wonder, who's going to be competing in this conference, possibly for a playoff spot, if at all at this point. I mean, I think it's pretty much a done deal that the Big 12 isn't going to make it in the playoff. I mean, your only undefeated teams are Oklahoma State, Texas, and Baylor. Everybody else already has a loss. Iowa State, Kansas State, Oklahoma, Texas Tech, West Virginia, TCU, Kansas. Now, some of those teams we're not surprised, right? We're not surprised that Kansas is 0-2. But, I mean, Oklahoma's sitting at 1-1. And you got an Oklahoma State and a Texas team, right? Those are the 2 teams that are really actually going to make any noise. And Oklahoma State, week 1, Tulsa, 17-6. That game was ugly. I watched it. It was ugly. And then, a Texas team that they should have lost on Saturday. They should have lost to Texas Tech. I mean, it's shocking to see how close and how ugly some of these games have been for the Big 12, especially their quote-unquote premier teams, right? The teams that are supposed to be head and shoulders above the rest of the conference. And, I mean, Texas, I don't know how they won this game. 63-56. It was a crazy fourth quarter. Let's just put it to you that way. A crazy fourth quarter. We did go into overtime, and it was decided in overtime. I mean, Ellinger threw for 5 touchdowns, and it was a really I think it was an opportunity. It's an opportunity for Texas to take a step back and say, okay, guys, we're not quite as good as we thought we were, right? We have a single-digit number next to our name, right? 8, but we're not really playing like the 8th best team in the country right now. We're just not. In fact, I think they dropped a spot in this week's rankings. So I don't know what to make of this performance from Texas. It just makes them look average. And when Oklahoma State and Texas have already looked very average, and there are 2 of the 3 undefeated teams left in your conference, At this point, I'm writing them off. I'm writing off Texas and Oklahoma State because I just don't think I don't think there's any way you can make an argument that those two teams are one of the best four at the end of the season. I mean, yeah, Texas is going to have the opportunity to play Oklahoma and Oklahoma State. Oklahoma State is going to play Texas. They are also going to play Texas and Oklahoma. So they're going to kind of mix and match here, and we'll get a good chance to see both or all three of these teams in different matchups. But the point is that there's really nobody in the Big 12 right now that's head and shoulders above everybody else, like there is a Clemson in the ACC, right? And actually, we'll talk about this at the end of the show, but Miami is creeping up there. If you don't think Miami poses a legitimate challenge to Clemson in the ACC this season, then you're not paying attention. Because after their performance against Florida State, they're the real deal. They're the best competition Clemson has seen in the ACC in years. I would say since 2015 when Clemson played the let's see, who did they? Was it North Carolina or Virginia Tech? It was North Carolina. Yeah, it was Clemson and North Carolina. 45-37 in the 2015 ACC Championship. That's and North Carolina was ranked 8th at the time. But Clemson has not seen competition in the ACC Championship really since 2015, in my opinion. And Miami is, I think they're going to be better by the time the season wraps up, and they're going to be better than that UNC team was. Miami poses a significant challenge for Clemson, significant challenge. But if they keep everything on track, which remains to be seen, right? There's been a lot of talk about, the Tennessees of the world are back, or the Texas of the worlds are back, and they have repeatedly shown that that's not the case. Miami sometimes gets grouped into that discussion. I think Miami gets a lot of unwarranted hype, but they're backing it up this year. Miami is seriously backing it up this year. Either way, to close out this Big 12 discussion, this is a very very troubling development for the Big 12 because they're not going to be in the college football playoff this year. I don't see how. I just with a Clemson, barring some sort of weird occurrence, you're looking at Clemson, you're looking at Ohio State. You're looking at the SEC champion, which I believe is going to be Florida. I think right now, based off of what I've seen, I would take Florida over Auburn. And then you could see somehow an Alabama team slip in because they'll have maybe a one less loss than an Auburn team. Maybe Auburn holds the tiebreaker on Alabama, but Auburn loses the SEC championship and Alabama gets in. Either way, I think you're going to see two SEC teams. You're going to see an ACC team. You're going to see a Big Ten team. You're going to see two SEC teams. They're not going to put a Big 12 team in there. You're not going to put a Texas team that needed to score 63 points to beat Texas Tech. And you're not going to put an Oklahoma State team in there that scored 16 points against Tulsa. Ain't happening. You can't. There's no argument. And yeah, it's, some people will say, well, it's only first few weeks of the season. Most schools only play 2 games. Well, yeah, but schedules are short this year. You NFL, every game matters, right? There's 16 games. College football, there's usually 12 games. Every game matters. Well, all of a sudden, there's fewer than 12. The Pac-12 is playing 7 games. ACC's playing 11. SEC's playing 10. Big 10 is playing 8. And the Big 12 is playing 10, I believe. I think I got all that right from memory. Either way, every conference is playing fewer than their normal amount of games. ACC's the closest because they're playing 11. But still, the Pac-12's basically cut their season in half. Every game matters a whole lot more. You better believe it. So I don't know. I don't know what you do if you're the Big 12. I mean, Texas they still have a undefeated record, and so does Oklahoma State. But they're gonna have to do a lot. They're gonna have to do a lot throughout the remaining weeks of the season to change that perception, especially after how they've performed over the last few weeks. But yeah, I mean, again, I think to kind of close out this discussion, I mean, who else in college football right now? Now, some people have said that Notre Dame could be that fourth team. And this is dependent upon Miami and Clemson squaring off in the ACC championship, and basically having to decide between a Notre Dame and we'll say Alabama. A Notre Dame team and an Alabama team. Let's say they have the same number of losses. In that situation, I think more people would probably pick Alabama because, whether you like it or not, your past record in big games does matter, and Notre Dame's is abysmal. Since several years ago, it's been abysmal in big games. But that's the only other scenario I see right now, and that is dependent upon Miami running the table, facing off against Clemson, and then you say Clemson or Miami wins that game, right? The winner of that game to the playoff, Ohio State to the playoff, SEC champion to the playoff, and then you have to pick between. Now, you have to pick between a Clemson, a Notre Dame, and an Alabama. Now that gets interesting. But see, here's the deal: it's two conferences. We're debating between it's two conferences, ACC and SEC. The Big Ten's got their lock in Ohio State. Nobody else is going to be able to compete for quote one of the best 4 team spots. Pac-12 is, they don't even matter at this point because they're playing half the number of games, and the Big 12 has just continued to shoot themselves in the foot. So I don't know. I don't know what other scenarios could be out there. If you've got an idea or something that you think could happen, let me know. You're welcome to tweet those ideas at me, or you can send a DM to the show's Instagram. Always love hearing what you think could potentially happen. But either way, I think the most likely scenario right now is 2 teams from the SEC plus an ACC champion and the Big Ten champion. So we will save the college football playoff discussion for later weeks. We're going to take one last break, and when we come back, we are going to dive a little bit deeper into how Miami could be the toughest ACC opponent for Clemson in years. Stick around. That's next. Welcome back to the show. Final segment of today's AFR, looking at the Miami Hurricanes, and we're gonna dissect the program a little bit. Talk about some of the things that they've already done this year, and some things that they need to do. Because the fact of the matter is, and we've alluded to it a little bit earlier in the show, but this matchup against Clemson on October 10th is huge. It is huge. And it is at Clemson. And it's going to be a game that really, kind of shows us what the pecking order in the ACC is. Even if Clemson is able to win this game, I still think there's a good chance that they have to take on Miami again at the end of the season in the ACC championship. Now remember, ACC this year is not doing divisions. So no divisions in the ACC this year. It's taking the best 2 teams. Notre Dame is still in that mix. I think right now you can make the case that there are 3 teams in the ACC who are in that conversation. North Carolina and Pitt are on the outside looking in. My point is that if you're Clemson, Notre Dame, or Miami, you really only need to have one team falter for you to get your spot. If you're North Carolina, you need 2. You need Clemson and you need Miami to just completely fall off the face of the earth. And if you're Pitt, you really need almost 3 or 4. There's so many other things that have to happen for the North Carolinas and the Pitts in order to it's in a perfect world, And I don't think it's going to happen. I don't think Clemson's going to fall off. I don't think Miami is going to fall off. And I think Notre Dame right now is proving that they're going to be a force to be reckoned with in the ACC. So we're going to put North Carolina and Pitt in that solid second tier of the ACC. Clemson's still in the top tier, and they're still head and shoulders above the Miami and Notre Dame teams in that top tier. But the difference this year is that there are multiple teams in that top tier. Clemson, I'd put Miami, and then I'd put Notre Dame. And then in tier 2, you've got, North Carolina, Pitt. Virginia has looked good. Virginia Tech is also looked okay. I think Boston College is a sneaky pick. A Boston College team that's played well against Duke. I mean, they did have the non-conference Texas State game, which it's hard to factor that into this discussion, but they did look good against the Duke Blue Devils. And remember, Duke played Notre Dame fairly close. So either way, second tier of the ACC is starting to get more populated, which is a good thing for the conference. It's a good thing for the conference. Going back to that tier 1, because that's really what we're discussing here, is we've already established who's in tier 1. All right, we got Clemson, we got Miami, we got Notre Dame. Now, Clemson, they're already on the throne, and they got to protect the throne. If you're Miami and you're Notre Dame, you're gunning for that throne. And obviously there's pressure that comes with that. Now, Clemson knows this. Dabo knows this. This is no surprise. I mean, we've been doing this for years. Okay, so Clemson knows exactly what they're signing up for every year, being the defending ACC champions. They still have a Virginia game on the 3rd before that Miami matchup. Now, Miami's got a week off, and then their next game, as of right now, as things stand, is they're going to play Clemson on October 10th. I think the outcome of that game will matter, but it will not determine who is in the ACC championship. It will determine who has an inside track, right? Miami wins that game, and all of a sudden, they're sitting pretty good. I mean, they got Pitt, and they got UNC. Again, that's those second-tier teams in the ACC. But other than that, you got NC State, Virginia Tech, Wake Forest, Georgia Tech, NC State. So, fairly manageable, especially if they knock off the number 1 team in the country. Okay, if Miami gets to that game, and they're 4-0, they're going to go into that Pitt game. They're going to be inspired. They're going to be like, hell yeah. We're going for it all, baby. And at that point, you got to imagine Miami will be a top 5 team. I mean, Miami would probably jump up to 3 or 4 if they knocked off Clemson, because Clemson is the consensus number 1 team right now in terms of the AP poll and how that's being voted on. So Miami certainly wants to win that Clemson game, but they also understand that if they clean the rest of their very manageable schedule, okay, you got the Pitt game and you got the UNC game. And the Pitt game is right after Clemson. So what you don't want to have happen is that you put everything into the Clemson game, which is on the road. It's going to be a tough environment, even if it's a limited crowd. And then there's a hangover. Even if they win, right, there's that hangover. And you have to be wary of that for both instances. Whether you win the game or lose the game, there could be a hangover. So if you take care of Pitt, then you get through the rest of the schedule, and you come down to UNC at the very end of the year, if Miami's sitting at a 1 loss, if they lose to Clemson, go 3-1, then they go, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, they're 9-1 going into UNC. That's a lot on the line. Could be tied with Notre Dame, right? Notre Dame could be 1 loss. They need to win that UNC game. I think they'll get it done. So my point with all of this is that Clemson-Miami is a huge game. It's going to be a massive game. But it is not going to define and determine who is in the ACC championship game. It will give the winner of that game an inside track to the ACC championship, but it's not going to determine who's in the ACC championship. Now, if you're Clemson, you get past Miami, and you're really looking at the Notre Dame road trip on November 7th and hosting Pitt on November 28th. Okay, FSU on the road, Georgia Tech, Syracuse, BC, Virginia Tech. You got to take care of business. Can't be, 6-0 until you're 5-0. But the games you're circling, Notre Dame on the road, and then Pitt at home. Miami doesn't have to play Notre Dame. So that does matter. That does matter. And, if say Clemson loses to Miami, right? Clemson drops the Miami game, and they have to beat Notre Dame. Notre Dame, they beat Notre Dame, and both teams are one loss into the end of the season. Both Clemson and Notre Dame are 10-1. Well, Clemson has that tie break because they beat Notre Dame head-to-head. So this game, again, and I want to reinforce this because I think it's important to recognize this Miami-Clemson game is big. It's big for the ACC. It's big for both teams. It does have college football playoff implications, but it's not going to determine anything. There are games later in the schedule that mean just as much, if not more. So you can't put all your eggs in that one basket. With that being said, Clemson and Miami is going to be a heck of a matchup. Now, yeah, Clemson's favored heavily, 87% or something. But you're selling Miami really, I think you're selling short. Would I take Trevor Lawrence over, Miami's Derek King? Yeah, I would. I would take Trevor Lawrence. But this guy has been really impressive. Okay, he has 736 passing yards, 6 touchdowns, no picks so far this season. And Trevor Lawrence, who has also looked impressive and who I would say right now is probably at the top of the Heisman, 519 yards, 4 touchdowns, no picks. Now, yeah, Lawrence has not played as much as Derek King in terms of minutes, because Clemson's throttling their opponents and playing everybody. But both of these guys are talented. And if you think that Clemson can just sleep through a Miami game, you are sorely mistaken. The Hurricanes are for real. They have dynamic playmakers on both sides of the ball. I think where Clemson will get the edge, because both of these teams are averaging 43 points a game. So both of these teams have good offenses with playmakers. But what sets Clemson apart is their defense. Their ability to shut down and stifle offenses is what's going to give Clemson the edge in this matchup. Now, we will, as this game gets closer, we will dedicate a portion of a show to breaking down the matchup and going through the different, But just right now, a brief overview. I think the difference in this game is Clemson's defense. And it could be, that Miami finds a way to still move the ball. In a shootout style game, it's closer. I still would favor Clemson, but it's going to be a lot closer than if Clemson just shuts down Miami's offense. And if Clemson does, if they manage to shut down Miami's offense, then that, I think, speaks more to Clemson's absolute dominance as the best team in the country than it does to, Miami's a fluke. No, Miami's not a fluke. That will prove that Clemson is the most dominant team in the country. So this is going to be a really interesting matchup. It's going to have implications, and it's going to matter, but it's not going to define the entire season. And I know that Dabo realizes that. And I know that Miami's head coach's name is escaping me. But it matters. It matters. Manny Diaz, I believe. Manny Diaz. It matters to both of these programs a lot. And it's a big deal for Miami. If they make this game close and they look competitive against Clemson on the road, they're going to be able to puff out their chest. They're going to, and they should. They should feel really good if they perform well in this game. And it's a tight, 7-point game. Anything closer than 10 points, if you're Miami, is a great performance. I don't know how you'd be unhappy with that. Especially considering some of the punishments that Clemson has handed out to Miami in the last few years. I'm thinking of that 56-0 game. They got Al Golden fired. But either way, this is going to be a really interesting matchup, and we will dedicate a portion of a show coming up to kind of diving into it a little bit deeper. and analyzing a few different things. But I think this is going to be really exciting. One of the biggest matchups in the ACC since Clemson and Louisville. Deshaun Watson against Lamar Jackson in 2016. I believe Louisville was 3 and Clemson was 5 at the time. But that had implications for playoff, ACC championship. It ended up not affecting the Heisman, although I question how that Heisman was decided based off of Lamar's performance at the end of the season. But either way, I think this is going to be the biggest matchup in the ACC in 3 or 4 years. And it's really going to be a great test to see where Miami is, as a program right now. I think they're legitimate. There's a lot of programs out there, though, that we all thought were, or some people, they thought, oh, LSU, defending national champions. It doesn't matter that all their teams, their roster's gone, depleted, coordinators are gone. They'll pick right back up where they left off. No, they won't. You're an idiot. LSU sucks, and they're going to suck for a while. So, either way, that has been it. That's all the time we have. Appreciate you tuning in, listening to this episode of After Further Review. Again, you can listen to us through podcast anytime, anywhere. Available on iTunes, Spotify, or the Anchor app. All you got to do is search After Further Review. Or you can check out the shows if you like seeing my face. Some people do, some people don't. On Facebook, all you have to do is search for After Further Review. And every show is cataloged there. You can check them out anytime you want to watch the shows live. But either way, that has been it. Another show will be coming sometime later this week. I think we'll probably do a Friday show and preview some of the pick'em matchups for this coming week. And actually, before we go off air, did want to go over and give a few shout-outs to some people in the pick'em league. Right now, I believe the best performance was 8 out of 10. I know I had 8 out of 10. But we also had Daniel Green, Robert Basha, and Jackson Wright. So congratulations to those three for getting 8 out of 10 picks for week 1. We had a couple 7 out of 10s, then a handful, actually a lot of 6s, and then some very unfortunate souls who got 4, and then, so. But either way, congrats to those guys. We'll see how the rest of the season goes. The week 2 matchups, I believe, have been announced, and we'll preview that on our Friday show. So appreciate you tuning in. That's all the time we have. And I'm Jay Smith. This has been After Further Review.